Aloha, my name's Anna Covert, and I'm coming to you from my battleship here on the beautiful island of Oahu. This week on the Covert Code, the topic is driving business through technology transformation. And my special guest is Marianne Bachynski, a seasoned executive with extensive experience leading IT strategy and business transformations for large Fortune 500 companies, including Morgan Stanley, AIG, and many more. Today, she's here to share insights on IT operations and business strategies to drive growth. Thanks so much for being here today, Marianne.
It's great to be here.
So to kick us off, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got to where you are right now?
Yeah, I started down the road in IT with advice from my father that technology was just going to explode, and that was the place to be. I had considered medicine, but I ended up in tech, and I really liked the combination of business and technology because both change rapidly, and really in a situation where you're constantly learning. I also love to solve problems, and again, with something like technology, you're never bored.
That's
And then so I've spent most of my career on Wall Street and financial services. I like to say I grew up at Morgan Stanley. I spent over 25 years there, and I probably supported every business they have. And that was what was really exciting to me, is to understand where they were going with their businesses, and how we could support them and get them there. And then I worked at Citibank, which was a really like being at a vendor. We were providing tech and operations to um, hedge funds, investment management firms, and and private equity firms. And I spent some time at Rabobank, which is a Dutch bank that's focused on food, ag, and sustainability, which was a very different world. And ironically, a lot happening, particularly from a technology perspective. And that was, loans and banking and commodity type trading. And most recently, I was at AIG. Um, AIG has a property and casualty and life insurance and investment arms. I came into the firm as a CIO for the investment arm, and then they ended up spinning off the life insurance and investment businesses to form a new public company called Corebridge, which we spent the last couple of years standing up a new firm, which was also very different and very challenging, and a really, really interesting experience.
wow. So are you background comes are you writing code or were you just more kind of doing business?
Yes, I started as a developer, application developer, and that's where where it all began. And then obviously moved up, in the leadership ranks, and got involved in infrastructure and cyber, et cetera, and the whole technology platforms.
Right. And then over the last, gosh, even decade, the banking with a lot of the different new legislation for technology and cybersecurity has really kind of sped up faster than other industries. How do you stay current?
It's a challenge. I think it's banking is highly regulated, obviously, and um, loaded with PII data. Everything is really uh, all forms of data, are really a cyber risk and a cyber issue. But I think it's similar to keeping current with your technology, right? It's all part and parcel. It's just that component and that overlay of cybersecurity and the overlay of regulatory just become part of the process, right? When you go down the road of doing a new project, or you're launching a new product, or taking on a different kind of client, you end up having to look at it from all different perspectives: the functionality, the risk, the cyber, the regulatory, and it's not a point in time. It's really part of the process, in a continual way, and you have to assume it's going to change, right? The regulations, we've gone through periods where they've added them. Now we're in a period where they're going to probably decrease some of them, but it's not something that can be thought of again as a finite situation. You have to look at it as a moving target.
Yeah, I think that's really important too. I mean, because I think a lot of clients or people in general, they just had this expectation that once something's built, that it's done and it should work the same way that it forever. And we always try to educate them on is there's a lot that's involved. We're using a software, right, and middleware, and that software they're making updates, and then the way people access it through browsers or through mobile devices, those have updates. Right, so even it could be perfect today, I mean, but, the most important thing is to, when you pick a partner, to pick one that can respond quickly, and what are the safeguards for ongoing testing and to make sure that things are working the way that we expect them to be. I think it's one of the more, like, ways to kind of view it in today's modern day.
Right. And I think you have to, you have to uh, build for success. And if you want to buy where you can buy or partner where you can partner, and then just build where it strategically makes sense for your business, you need to be a good partner and you need to be a good client. And what I mean by that is don't, use the tools out of the box. Don't customize them to the point where the overhead is just crazy. Or don't partner with someone that you can't work well with back and forth and operate in an agile way, because it's just going to stranglehold you. And you always have to be able to pivot. And I think it's again, it's just you want to be proactive and not reactive all the time, particularly with stuff like cyber, right? And you don't want to be backward looking and saying, "Oh, do we have exposure, or what happened? What went wrong?" You want to have continual, um, navigation around that, and always be looking at it with a proactive lens. And part of that too is just the commitment to your technology, right? Tech debt it can kill you. Yeah, I always say there's three things that are guaranteed in life, you know, death, paying taxes, and legacy technology will fail you, likely at the wrong time. And you have to you have to take care of it, right? And I think um sometimes, I think right now in this point in time as well, it is just so distinct in the impact, because if you can't leverage what you can do with data in the cloud if you're not in the cloud, and you sure as heck can't do anything with AI if you don't have accessible data that's high quality, right? All these foundational things, if you don't keep marching down that road, it's like never servicing your car,
Right.
right?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really
It's
important point because I think, we had talked a little bit about before we start the pod about how, so many companies are like hamsters and they just want to hold all their data. They don't want to let anything go, right? But the fact is it usable? First of all, is it legal to hold? And if we are holding it, how are we using it? And if there's a DNC, they do not disturb, or if someone has executed their right to be removed or purged, we want them to be purged.
Yeah.
We don't want to hold this data. It's expensive to hold. And then to your point, it's not usable for AI. And then it just creates another conflict of interest.
Right, and you can't, in legacy technology, the data is buried under the ground. You can't get at it. And it's very difficult to maintain it and reconcile it, or whatever the case may be. And so I think again, you have to move forward and think about having that data platform. The other thing that does for you is it lifts out um, you know the information from different applications, because you don't want to be hardwired to particular applications, and then that information cannot be used across discipline. It's stuck in one place, and you can't get at it. And so again, it's just this continual investment that you would do with any kind of valuable, let's call it your car, right? Or your house, or whatever it is. If you don't, you have to keep taking care of it. And sometimes people will look at, do they want to spend the money on a tech project, let's say. And at the end of the day, there's three or four reasons to do a project, right? It's regulatory, it's revenue, it's cost savings, it's risk management. There's sort of those 4 or 5 basic things, and if you have to look at it from the fact of, what's the business case for this investment, right? Because it has to be, and can you self-fund it? I mean, I've been in many, many, many situations in my life where I've, had to self-fund it and get really creative. But really what you're doing is by doing that project, this is going to be the result. There's going to be a result. And sometimes not doing a project is actually riskier. Doing nothing can be extremely risky, right? Because what can be the outcome that you're no longer supported by the vendor because it's so old, or you can't launch a business you want to get into, a new product or a new client, because you're not able to make the changes that you need to support that. So it's really about always keeping yourself, you know, fit for change.
Yeah, I think that yeah, it's a really, really good point. And it almost makes me even think about regular consumers. The other day, I was having lunch with my mom and one of her friends, and she was saying her friend was in town and had this Apple 10 phone. And she's like, oh, yeah, it made a comment that she couldn't do something with it because it was so old. And I just told him, like, this is a risk for you. But not only that you may be compromising security by having this old phone, but what are you not able to experience because people aren't supporting it? And you have to always think about your customer's experience. And like, we used to always do browser compatibility for, uh, Edge back to version 10, and now it's like version 14 or whatever it might be. But those clients that were, they insist on having back compatibility, and there's only like less than 1% of consumers on it. It's like, well, no, we're not going to support that. And as having that confidence to say that we're going to commit to updates in the future, and these users, we're not going to let them even access our software because they're a risk.
Right, right. I mean, you look at but they've uncovered that our Treasury Department is running COBOL. Like,
Oh.
that's that's really chilling because first of all, you can't do a lot of quick change in COBOL, but also there's not a lot of people left. If they're left, they're probably on the golf course, if they're still around. So it's yeah, you definitely have to think about that. But I think it's also a mindset because, you know, for years and years it was always about stability and control, and again the change was slower, so you build it and it does have a longer shelf life. Um but it was definitely this the real focus was on stability, right?
Right.
And now it's not that you're going to make it unstable, but now it's more about embracing change, and it's just going to be constant transformation, constant change. There's always going to be uncertainty, so you now need to be really good at change. You need to be, you know, create high performing teams, sustained urgency. That's just normal, and it's not a, a circumstance that's gonna come and go. It's not going away.
Yeah. No, I think that
And
that's absolutely 100% true.
it's a different, embrace it is really, and be good at it is the way that I look at it. Having sort of grown up in a real time trading environment for a big part of my career, um, that's just kind of this doesn't feel different to me this point in time than it did 20 years ago, because it's you're first of all you you can't be down during the market when the market's open during the day. It's a real time situation, and there's very little room for error. But also the constant change and new products and new clients and new countries and new regions. They're always wanting to trade something new, and there's a requirement of perfection with the financial side of it. So, that's just, to me, that's normal. But I also think, it's a change for the last 10, 15 years after the financial downturn and then COVID, et cetera. We haven't had the growth that we had in the 90s and the early 2000s. Um, and with growth, you have constant change, right? And so, I think it feels very different with the speed and scale that we're facing today. But it's not really. It's just, having lived that, you do have to experience it a little bit. It's like being in a war, right? You're just doctors that operate every day. That's just the way it is. There's always something. There's
So
always
how would you recommend like a company set? Because I'm hearing here, and I totally agree 100%. That we need like a budget, especially just for technology, ongoing auditing, and transformation, right? Because I think that one of the reasons, maybe to your point, of why it's not being embraced is because people now are in this recovery mode, and they're the first thing to go usually is marketing, of course, right? Because they're like, oh, what is this little line item here? We don't need this to keep the lights on. Let's scratch that out. But other projects, like, or big upgrades, oh, let's we don't have the money for it right now. We don't have the ability to invest in that right now, right? But as to your point, it's critical, because without that, you won't survive. So how can a company start to plan for this transformation in their budgets? What's your recommendation?
well, one thing is to really and maybe it's because I supported portfolio managers for so long, but I used to look at the budget like a portfolio, right? And so look at what you're spending, where are your tech dollars going? What percentage is for just keeping the lights on, or what percentage is for regulatory or for cyber? What percentage is truly investment? Um, and sometimes that can be fairly sobering, because let's say you have I don't know, an old situation, and so it's just all maintenance, like you just really aren't doing it, or whatever it is. And think about, where do you want to get to on that? But I think, again, ironically, today, where we are with technology, um there's a lot more opportunity to self fund, and because you can do things so much faster, um, and your overhead for support ongoing and for changes ongoing, all of that's gonna decrease. It's
Yes.
not gonna be all the money goes to just keeping the lights on, if you will. And, so, it's cost avoidance too. Like, you can't just look at cost savings, right? But it's future cost avoidance. If you spend a little bit now, your run rate is going to be so much cheaper, and your ability, the most important part is more so the ability to respond to changes in the market and to keep up with your competitor. It's not a nice to have anymore. You need to be able to work at speed in order to compete. Somebody else is going to be able to get it done. So you're gonna be left behind. Again, it's not really optional.
Oh, it's not. Yeah, it
It's
looks like
not.
when you're going to start a business or even think about growth, this has got to be one of the most important things that you add. That what is our technology? How are we going to maintain it? How are we going to support it? And if we don't have the money for it, now is not the time to invest in this new opportunity, or even maybe start a new business.
Right, or but even if you're not starting a new one, if you don't, maybe it could be the end of the existing one. You could go out if you don't,
Yeah,
right? If you
absolutely.
don't keep evolving.
So, how do you balance technology advancements with business goals to ensure profitability?
Well, again, you start with the business, you don't start with technology, right? They're the clients, they're the paying customer, they're the reason that we're there. And I've always really pushed with my teams, don't do anything unless you know why you're doing it.
Yes.
You know, like, first of all, you want to do it right. But second of all, technologists, they just want to, okay, let's execute, let's go, come back, come back, come back, come back, and understand really what is the business trying to do. Um, and how can we enable that? And the goal is always to not to be the obstacle to growth or revenue, or risk, or whatever that is. That you never want tech to be the thing that's holding back a business.
Right.
So, the technologists have to understand the business and where they're going, and they have to take the time to really appreciate how the business model is evolving or changing, or where their pain points are in their existing platforms, um, and really think about being an enabler. Um, and so, again, you have to be a bit of a hybrid person. You can't be just a technologist,
A
for
unicorn.
technology's sake. Pardon?
A unicorn. That's our new term now for
Yeah, right.
well, the techie people who can speak English, you know?
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, like when I do a technology transformation, I always like to start with, interviews of all the key team members,
Mhm.
HR and even and everyone, every key leader. And it's like, how are you using the technology today? I want to you to show me. I want to watch you use the technology, and what's the customer's journey? What is the employee journey? What is, all the way from billing to purchase, inventory, all
Mhm.
of it. And then, we document where we're at, how we're using it today. And then you said exactly what you said, like, what are the pain points? Oh, this is what we want it to do, or, oh, we want to, how are you notifying the customer? Oh, then we have to go into this software and we send the text out. And
Mhm.
and then we have to go into this one and we,
Right.
monitor the inventory. And then it becomes, I think, really it's about the way you sell it to your team and the excitement, because when we have those conversations, at least when I do, the feeling then changes to, oh no, we have to change something that we're doing, to, oh wow, we get to change what we're doing.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And that opportunity, it's like if you have to pick up, you have to do something versus you get to. It's a totally different mindset. How do you work out, training, or I mean with big companies like you work for, the technology is just the beginning. How do you train and make sure people are up to date on how to use it the right way?
You mean the business people, the users?
Yeah, the users.
Well, again, they have to do training. They have, just like we have to be trained in the technology, they have to be trained in as a user. I mean, it's equally, it's just, you have to have a tech aptitude, I'll call it, um y- TQ, I don't know. That has to be something that business people are judged on, right? And that takes a certain mindset. For me, having always been in financial services, I'm lucky because it's a very quantitative business. It's very analytical. It's very data driven, transactional, which they're consumers of technology. You go to someone like marketing. I know you're, but which is creative. Um, I just had, one of the things I did when we spun off Corbridge is we had to stand up obviously a new website, right, for a new public company. And it's just a very different experience, right? Because they're so creative and they're changing it all the time, how they want to make it look. And like, they're not really the type of people who are used to testing things. And like, it's just, they don't have that kind of regiment. That's not what their job is. Or CRM system where
They
you're
upload
building
400,000
relationships for
records and then
sales.
break.
Yeah.
Yeah.
th- th-
We just had that happen the other day.
yeah, like that.
Someone uploaded 400,000 records to our Go High Level, and then it broke all the workflows, and then like, what happened? Like, well, why would you do this? Like, what happened? I mean,
What possessed you?
that should have been let's stop and talk to the team, and like, we'll safely upload it and figure out if we should, first of all, and then what we're going to do with it when we do. And,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. No, but so again, then that's where you have to really train what's in it for them. Like, if my clients are my, that's my, you know, I own the client, and that their relationships I have with the clients is what my worth is. So why do I want to give you all that information in the system, right? And so, but then they learn that they can track the meetings they've had and what went on and what they need to do with follow-ups or whatever it may be. Then they can see the value for them. And it's just a different experience, a different learning experience. But again, you have to take training of using a system as seriously as training on building technology.
Yeah.
It's part of your, but over the years, that's become something that they get rated on in their performance reviews, right? The business
We hope
people.
so. I mean, what
Yeah.
my experience has been is, that, and I think that I also, being somebody who does this a lot for companies, and being techie, right? We will do PowerPoint presentation with slides of, this is workflows, this is how we, automations, and how the lead sources, and this is where the leads come from, and all that. And we'll do
Mm.
videos, and we'll do, trainings, and then we think, okay, great, we've done it. But that's not enough. And I think that it's got to be ongoing and constant. Like it's not a, oh, they're going to learn how to do it, because it's always evolving. How we use it should change as well based off of people
Right.
using it and using it right, and then being like, you know what, this isn't how we want to. I know we designed it this way, but actually we should be using it this way. And
Well,
yeah,
it's also it's always harder to change the people than the technology, right? I think that's just a given, and I mean always. And I think one of the things that technologists bring to the table is ways of working, like even just doing a project. You know, it's true that technology is a team sport, and what does that really mean? It means we are used to everything we do. We need multiple people, right? There's not the info guy, the database guy, the app dev, whatever it may be. So we're used to coming together cross discipline and collaborating and working together as a team. But when you're in sales, you're in sales. When you're in marketing, you're in marketing. When you're a trader, you're a trader, and you don't typically have to do that. But a lot of technology, the way it's evolving, is much more shared across discipline, and they need to come to the table and work with the different groups in IT, also with the different groups in their business.
yes.
And that can be a challenge, but it's a different way of working. You can't just stay in your swim lane. And it just, I always call it, what people and disciplines do you need to create the whole brain for whatever problem you're solving, right? And there's many, many more now. For problems are more complex and they're more intricate, and so you can't develop like if you look at where AI is a learning and decision making tool. Okay, wow. So the business has to be way more involved in that, in building a model. I Right? It's totally different than a transaction, processing a transaction. That's a completely automating a manual process. This is very, very different. It's knowledge management. It's coming in and saying, okay, how, where where this is going to learn as it processes. And so it's so much more tightly coupled with technology. And it's, again, it's just that ability to work across discipline and understand what we need to know to do our job and what they need to know to do their job, and really being interdependent on each other. That's why this whole concept of adaptive leadership and trust and transparency, all of that, it cannot be command and control. It just won't work. It just doesn't work.
No, it's 100% true. And I think you brought up a really interesting concept of, with the AI. One of the fears that I always have is, if you have a team and we have data today and we're using that to create a model, right? And that's great. And it's going to learn off of that model and the
Right.
food fed it. But what happens later, right? Or if we don't continue to, create these key milestones of learning. Okay, this was data set one, and then we changed something. It might have been we mandated to change what we could collect, what we couldn't, what we are choosing to collect, who has access, who doesn't have access, whatever it might be. And what are those clear markers of, so that the AI understands that there's been a change, right? And like that's part of the evolution, right?
Mhm.
Can it be predictive? Because otherwise, if we train it today, and I have a lot of clients doing this, and they think that they're done. Well, you're not done, because you're going to change tomorrow and the consumer is changing. So what is the constant ability for us to be feeding it the right information to get the desired result, so that we are using it for the future learning capability that it has?
Right. Yeah. It's just totally different. Um, I think it's the most dramatic change I've seen anyway. And in technology, it's not a matter of learning a new language or a new infrastructure, hardware changes or whatever. Um, it's really invasive to how you think, how you work, um, how you the technology, building the models. It's really more of a data science type of person. And data in itself is kind of a hybrid, right? You have to understand the data, you have to understand the business, you have to understand the technology. Um, So it's very in and of itself, it's very much cross discipline.
Indeed.
And again, tech is that's one place where tech can really help, because we've always worked as a cross discipline teams, as I mentioned, and it's you know that we know how to work that way.
I had a question for you since you're in banking. So I had a guest on recently. It's actually this week's guest, and specializes in cybersecurity. And he mentioned a recent fraud scheme, and it was for banking, right? And what they were able to do is, fake or deep fake a Zoom, right, with leadership. So they were able to actually so this guy at the bank, I guess, and I don't have all the details, but what I heard was that there was some large transaction that was requested, and he's like, no, you're not following the proper protocol. And then he gets a Zoom invitation, and it looks like it's from the president of the company. And he gets on, and it's actually like they've been able to deep fake a Zoom with the president saying to do this to transfer these funds. And so he did, yeah, and it was like it was a lot of money, like $500,000 or whatever it was, and it just brought up this, I think, learning of that with technology moving the way it is, the process and checks are critical, and no matter what,
Mhm,
whoever calls you, whatever,
mhm,
it doesn't matter if it's a president, it doesn't matter if
mhm.
you're seeing him on the screen, you always follow the protocol. Have you heard anything about that? Or, it was, do you have
No, that's frightening. I get that it's possible because you see that you can make people look like they're saying what they're not saying, right? And it looks like them and it sounds like them, and um, but yeah, certainly you can't something that big. You wouldn't be verbal, really, only
right?
verbal, right? I it just um, I think it's also it's just this we've learned to train ourselves to if some email as an example looks weird, right? Or and then you say you get it's supposedly from your bank, but then you look at the email and it's a Gmail or whatever it is, or some weird email. It's not the bank, and or whatever it is. We know we've started for phishing and things like that. We've how to build awareness, but this is going to be even harder and harder and harder. So it's almost becoming like the default that you don't trust anything,
Right.
you know. And it's really unfortunate because any kind of technology, there's always a tremendous positive and a huge downside. There's always, social media connects all these people and then also destroys teenage lives and all the bad, the usual issues around the downside. And with this, it's the potential. I think particularly in healthcare, right? Where now they're taking all this data when people have donated their bodies to science, and they're coming up with cures for things, and because they can analyze and consume so much data that they could never ever ever do before. And that's an example of that's going to be just amazing. But then you get these issues, and the dark side is really dark. and it's going to take a lot to it's sort of what you're seeing too is like if you look at JP Morgan, they're they're trying to do it all internal. It's their data. They have control over that data. They're hiring their own modelers, building their own models, doing it all in the confines of their own four walls, if you
Yeah.
will. And but that's really expensive, right? So it's certainly not something that everybody can do. But it's gonna take some figuring out to how do you control, how do you figure out we can't even figure out fake news, right?
Right.
Unless it's so ridiculous that you kind of figure maybe it is fake. But yeah, so how do you and you can get emails from your bank that literally they have the logo, they have everything, right? It
Yeah, and
looks
even if you click on it, it looks like because my mom had one of those, and she always calls me now, so she knows to
yeah.
not do anything. But we clicked on the link. I clicked on the link, and it was like they did a hyperlink or whatnot with a mask, and went to the site, and it looked like the login page, but the domain was different. And And it's just, wow, and it just makes me feel like if these people, they're so smart, obviously, to be able to come up with a scheme. If they just use their power for good,
I know.
again, and is this really the karma that they want and the experience that they want to have? It's really upsetting. But I guess my last question for you, well, I guess a two-part question is, I how we were introduced was from the Authority Media Network. So I know that you just started on your first book, which so congratulations on that. Can you tell us a little bit about when we might expect it to be released, and then on that same note, looking ahead to the future of technology, what trends do you think will shape the next generation of IT leadership?
Yeah, well, thanks on the book. Yeah, the Forbes books had reached out to me, and I hadn't really, life happens when you're making other plans, but it's actually been a really interesting journey, learning about the whole world of book writing and publishing, etc. It should be published by the end of the year. It just started in January, so they tell me it takes about a year. And it's multifaceted. I think probably at the heart of it is about uh, leading through rapid change and transformation. It's something I've kind of been in my whole life, just as I mentioned earlier, with real time types of situations, and the nature of the businesses I've supported. But it's obviously it's just focus for everyone now to speed and scale, and really just embracing change and being comfortable with it and being really good at it, and being comfortable with uncertainty, and all that that takes when you build teams. Something I I I say I'm a data junkie and an execution addict. I just love information and I love learning and I love executing. And I yeah, get a little crazy, but to me, it's always been a passion for building high performing teams and allowing people to achieve their highest potential. I love working with people and finding them in the organization and pulling them up and giving them a platform for which they can excel. And people are amazing when you give them the opportunity. The ideas that they come up with and just uh, it's incredible some of the experiences I've had with people, and I've also been the only woman in the room a lot. Being sort of in technology and Wall Street are both very heavily dominated by men, and that's been a very interesting journey. Lucky enough, I have phenomenal parents, and my father was a profound mentor for me in terms of leadership, and my mother was a badass, and really kind of raised me to be fearless. So the combination was really helpful as I moved through being a little bit of the odd man out. Um, I always remember years ago, we had a meeting, about 10 or 15 of us. I was the only woman, and we had somebody from Silicon Valley come out, and he introduced himself and he asked us all to say our names, and he had a ponytail, that was common at the time, and we were all in our stupid suits, and he was he was in his jeans, and he said, "Well, the only person I'm going to remember is Marianne, because she's the only other one with a ponytail in the room." But at any rate, that it's it's been a fun experience so far. And I can't so the second question was,
But I think with the future technology, what trends do you think are going to shape the next generation of IT leaders?
well, again, I think that the IT leaders are gonna have to have, increasing, emotional IQ, adaptive IQ, and, focus on the behavioral and the cultural aspects, um, even maybe eclipsing the technical, skills. I think, technologists can be very black and white, and it's the gray, it's the uncertainty, it's the complexity, um, that we need to focus on, and that's the hard stuff, I think, and it's just also the ability to truly be collaborative. Um, I think one of the benefits of COVID was it flattened the table, right? You're all on Zoom and there's no head of the table, and we really need to operate like peers, whether you're up, down, or and whether you play different roles, and being able to sometimes lead, sometimes be a team member, play a different position on the field, and be able to be agile in terms of how you operate. I always say at the beginning of a project, you take all the players off the field and then you put back who you need. What game are you playing? It's probably different than the game you just played. Where well, and where are the gaps, right? What are the skill sets that you need? And it's got to be, you've got to be able to do that over and over and over again, much quicker. Quick. But really just be comfortable with your own with uncertainty and with change, and I think that takes it's a lot more of the behavioral or cultural side of it, uh, that that's required, and it's because the tools are just going to become more and more and more advanced, right?
Yeah, and now with AI being able to write code in a lot of cases,
Right.
and I think you're 100% right. It's very thoughtful.
And I think data science in and of itself is a key. We're always going to have a human understanding and reviewing what the model comes out with, right? It's not it's and the judgment and things like that a human brings to it is so critical. But again, that's a more other side of the brain than the actual building the tech.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. This was captivating. And to learn or connect with Marianne, you can visit her on LinkedIn. And we'll be all standing by for this book release. When it's released, we'll do another announcement, of course. And maybe you can come back on and share that with our listeners. And for everyone who is listening today, thanks for joining me. Please follow us next week on the Covert Code as we interview another industry expert and a topic to help you succeed on and offline. I'll see you in the pixels. Aloha.